Welcome to Flink Dimensions. Martin Flink here again. Just going to show you something quickly today, and it's HDR, high dynamic range images from JWildfire. I'm going to show you how to tone map them using Fusion from Blackmagic Design, this free standard version of it, and show you very quickly how easy it is to just bring in an image to your flow straight from Explorer and just drop it. You can drop it into the viewer. Takes a second or two to just process. The reason for this is because we're working in 32-bit float space, and that is basically 32 bits per channel, which gives you access to a tonal range of over 4 billion shades per channel, RGB and alpha. Now let's see what we can do with this. Obviously we want to be bringing in a color corrector in this case to show you how we can remap the colors and how we can change contrast, brightness and all that kind of stuff. Now the best way to do this, the easiest way, is if you've set up your toolbars and just drag and drop it on top of the viewer that was already showing this image. That means that we've already connected it. Another way of getting access to your tools: select the tool that you want to attach it to, hold down your shift key and press space, type in what you're looking for, and when you find it on the list there, just hit enter, and then you can drop that manually into the viewer that you want. I'm going to drop it over here and view the original here. And then what you can do is obviously start working on your color correction. Now, so what you can do with the color corrector is, first of all, if you look at this area here, we have a tint. We can apply a tint to an overall image, and as you can see down here, we have the tint angle, which gives you what sort of shade you're going to use, and strength. The closer you go to the edge, the closer you get to full power. So you can get kind of very fine nuances by just doing that. Now I'm doing it on the master level, but I can also kind of go in and do it on the mid-tones, for example. And just, you know, so we have control over shadows, mid-tones and highlights separately, as well as the overall master. Now you can change your hue, and that changes the hue of all the pixels. And I'm undoing here with Control Z and bring on the saturation in this case. I'm also going to increase the contrast a little bit and maybe take the gain down, up. Might take the gain up. As you can see here, the image was originally fairly washed out, and now when I've actually increased the contrast and gain here a little bit, what I've done is I've blown out the highlights completely here. And this is the cool thing about float images, is that you can 32-bit float, is that you can retain all the data that you would otherwise have clipped. So by just increasing the brightness of all overall pixels here, if I go into highlights, I can sort of go and retrieve those images or those pixels, or the information in the highlight area again, so we can kind of get back to what we basically wanted here, even though we overall brightened the image, right? So gain in one area doesn't mean that we lose it, and that's the big thing about 32-bit float, is that you can basically use adjustments fairly heavy duty and still retain all the information that was there to start with. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you here. This is the one that I set up earlier. So by the way, if I'm scrolling here with my mouse wheel holding down the control key, I'm zooming in and zooming out. We can fit the image this way. So what we've done here is we've just shown you very quickly how we can kind of color correct highlights, midtones, shadows, or overall in the master. And another thing we can do here is we can do the hue on the outer wheel here, rather than using the slider here. The other thing that we need to maybe sometimes figure out is what areas are the shadows, midtones and highlights within the picture. What pixels are those belonging to? And that's why we have the ranges here, and we can see result is the default here. If I show shadows, all the brighter areas here are the shadow areas, the midtones and the highlights, which is fairly obvious here. Now the thing is, this part here you can actually adjust. If you adjust these things, you can push or pull down the amount of pixels that are part of the highlights if you want. And the same thing for the shadows. If I want to kind of increase the amount of shadows, then I push this up. Now the remainder in the center here is what the midtones are, so they are adjusted by adjusting the highlights and the shadows. Anyway, you can do all this on overall luminance, or you can do it on the red, green, blue, or even the alpha if you have an alpha channel. Okay, go back to result then when you're done, and correction here. And what you can see here is we also have color correction, levels, which is where we can basically see the histogram, the image pixel values and full range of them. And you can basically crunch the blacks or the highlights like so, and the center one here is basically your gamma, so you can kind of adjust that. Can reset all this, and you can do all this for red, green, blue. You can do it for shadows, midtones and highlights. Then the other one here we have is the equalize in the histogram. Now this is kind of something that you wouldn't normally use too often, but it's kind of something that you could use if you have an image that has a very low kind of amount of range, so you can kind of get better contrast in it. You can equalize it. We're going to reset all that. There's lots more settings, so I'm not going to go through all of it. The other thing you have here is suppression, where you can basically go in and say, I'm going to suppress, for example, all the greens in this image. Now, I didn't catch them all because the angle of my green is actually at a slightly different angle on the color wheel, so I might just twist that. As you can see, we're bleaching out the greens in this particular case. And the yellows, actually there's a lot of yellows in there, so by doing that I can catch them all. I could have gone and done this instead. Right, and again, shadows, midtones and highlights. So that's it. You know, very quickly, there's lots and lots of settings. You can just play with them and see what happens. Now the main thing about all this that's very important is that because the HDR has all this additional information beyond the highlights, things that are bleached out, you still have them, and beyond the black you still have detail, and all of those details you can manipulate with a tool that can work in 32-bit float. What I have here to show you is, here's an 8-bit version and here's a 32-bit version. They are identical at the initial look of it, but basically this is a normal PNG file and this is a 32-bit float image that I brought in. Here's the 8-bit version of it. What I've done here is I put a brightness and contrast tool here, and I pumped up the brightness on this, and as you can see we've blown out the highlight area altogether. Now I'm putting in the color corrector here, and by looking at the color corrector I can go in and say, okay, I'm going to take down the brightness and maybe the gamma or whatever, and that affects the whole image. But if I go to highlights, if I take down the gain here, see what happens? All of that stuff, it's gone. All the info that I had here in the original image, which even in the original image was kind of blown out, because it's 8-bit, it's gone. I can't ever see it again. Whereas in HDR, brightness and contrast tool, color correction tool, see the difference? I've done the same kind of thing here, blown out the highlights and washed out the whole image by brightening it up too much. Well, in a later tool here, I basically have access to all of that stuff that would normally be clipped as it was in 8-bit format. So by just adjusting it here, I've now retained the brightness information that was in the highlights, and that is exactly why HDR images are superior when it comes to getting color work done. Now in this case I'm just messing around with these images. I haven't done anything particularly nice here. I'm just messing around to show you how easy it is to do these things. Now when you're finished doing something like this, you can save the images very quickly out of your viewport by just right clicking and save image. Just give it a name. I just call it tutorial test, and when I just put in .png, it automatically knows what I want. However, I can also pick the format from the huge list of different types of file formats, but by just putting in the file extension myself, I don't even have to. Right, so that's it, and all I have to do then is go and find my image in here, and that's basically it. And as you could possibly see, there's a major improvement here. It was completely washed out when I started, even without the original brightness tool that I had in here. That image was washed out in all aspects, even the 32-bit one. But the difference is the HDR image has retained a lot of that information, as you can see here. And that's all there is to it. Basically, the rest of it is Fusion in general. Plenty of fun stuff to be doing there. Plenty of future tutorials, and I have some there already if you want to learn more about Fusion. JWildfire as well, and there's much more coming because version 3 has just been released at the time of recording this. Anyway, go and have fun. This is a serious feature in JWildfire, and Fusion is a great companion to play with. Okay, bye bye.